Hi, I'm Carla Gober. Welcome to This Life. Have you ever heard statements such as this? I would have gone to therapy, but I didn't have a therapist near me where I lived. Or someone might have said, I would have gone to therapy, but I was so afraid that the counselor wasn't a Christian or wasn't a believer. Or you might have heard someone complain that they would have gone, but their spouse wouldn't go with them or refused to go with them or wanted them to go first to see how it worked. There are all kinds of questions related to therapy, and that's the topic for today on This Life.
Here are 5 facts you may not know about therapy. Number 1, psychologists, marriage and family therapists, counselors, social workers, psychiatrists may all perform psychotherapy.
Oh, so there's not just a thing called therapy. There's all different.
Yes, they're all different kinds. 2, you don't have to be crazy to enlist the services of a therapist.
Do tell.
Therapy is confidential. That means that by law, your therapist can't tell anyone else that they are your therapists. It is considered grossly unethical behavior for a therapist to try to change your religious beliefs or impose their beliefs on you. And finally...
But now, sometimes that happens, I think. I know a lot of people are afraid, or at least afraid that that will happen.
Yes, right. But they need to know that it's unethical behavior for that to happen. Finally, sometimes a person feels worse after seeing a therapist, which makes them think therapy isn't working.
Sounds familiar. Well, I have a situation here to talk about that I heard about, and let me just share this story. Merle, who is a 32-year-old mother of 2, suddenly found herself having a difficult time getting out of bed in the morning. And after she got her children off to school, she would climb back into bed and she would just sleep the day away until it was time for them to come home. And apparently her mother died 3 years ago in a car accident, and her father was driving and he was intoxicated. So it killed the mother instantly, this terrible accident that occurred.
Hang on just a second. So we have a woman, Merle.
We have a woman, Merle.
About how old is she?
32.
She's 32.
She has 2 children. And so she's not getting out of bed in the morning because she's pretty overwhelmed with all of this that's happening.
And the person that died
was her mother.
Was her mother in a car accident.
In a car accident caused by her father.
Now, was the father in the car at the time?
He was driving.
He was driving.
Intoxicated.
Oh, okay. So I thought it was another car. Okay,
no,
so
he was intoxicated. He was driving. He drove into another vehicle. Mom was killed instantly. So the situation is that Merle hasn't spoken to her dad since the accident, and she's afraid to have him around the kids because of his drinking.
And it's been 3 years.
And it's been 3 years. The pastor, now Merle's pastor, gave a sermon just a couple weeks ago that if you love the Lord and if you give yourself to the Lord, that you will have a changed life and you will be happier, and that faith in God to work out all your difficulties will absolve a lot of these kinds of things. And it's not happening for her, so she's really worried about it. So she's feeling worse and worse about herself. She's wondering what her faith is like if she's given herself to the Lord and nothing's changed. She's still angry. She's trying not to think about it. Sounds to me like she's really depressed.
What was her relationship with her father before the accident? Or do we know?
I don't think we know. I don't think we know. That's not something that's part of this scenario that I know about. But I do know that now she finds just the name of him intolerable. So she's feeling really guilty that she can't stand the sound of him.
I'm just overwhelmed by the information you just shared. You know, I'm stuck there. For a young woman to go through all of that at one time. I mean, I don't even, I can't even, I know why she doesn't want to get out of bed in the mornings. I mean, just to get up and make her children, prepare her children to leave, to crawl back into bed makes so much sense to me. And yet, there is so much more than that where she is. You know, the depression, I mean, it seems immediately to me, it's like, oh, wow, she's depressed. how do we address someone with this kind of depression who then hears from the pastor, if you love God, you know, you're not going to feel this way.
Yeah, that's not going to be a problem if you have faith, in other words.
How old are her kids, and are they on talking terms with their grandfather?
No, they're not. They're not allowed to speak to the grandparents. They're 8 and 10.
Oh, so they're still little.
They're young. So they've grown up pretty much without.
And has he been an abusive alcoholic?
I don't have that information. I don't know.
I think, you know, just hearing this story, her emotions are raw. Raw. You know, here it is, she's suffering from the loss of her mother, you know, and there's nowhere to turn. And
well, but think about it, it's been 3 years. So she's 3 years.
But she's not talked to anyone.
For 3 years she hasn't talked to him. I'm trying to figure out what does not talking to him gain? You know, you think about it.
Well, I think she's just so mad she won't. She doesn't feel that he deserves a relationship with her or her family because of what he did to her mother.
So she's punishing him.
She's punishing him.
Oh, okay.
But then she feels she can't imagine doing something else just because that's her mother's life. Now her children have no grandmother. So she's really wondering spiritually, what do I do? Is my faith any good? Is it all a sham if I can't get past this?
Well, she doesn't seem to know yet that her inability to forgive her father keeps her in pain. You know, forgiveness is not just about the person you extend forgiveness to. Forgiveness gives you room and space to breathe, to kind of step back and say.
But is that really forgivable if one parent kills another? That's a tall order to say, I'm going to forgive someone who killed someone very close to me, don't you think?
Well, but I doubt that he got into the car that morning and said, I'm going to kill my wife.
Well, that's true.
I don't think it was a planned homicide.
That's true, but that's a risk you take when you engage in that kind of behavior.
Absolutely.
But okay, I'm just going to take the devil's advocate here, but
okay.
She knows he's an alcoholic.
So why did she get in the car?
Exactly.
Maybe, I don't know, maybe she didn't
I'm not trying
drive.
to blame her. I'm just asking questions. It's not, you know.
I think, you know, for the daughter, I'm going back to her where she is right now and the pain she's in, and how this pain, Merle, and how this pain is also being passed on to her children. You know, and I don't know if her father, we don't have the information whether her father has changed his ways or not as a result of this awful thing that's happened to their family. But there needs to be some breakthrough here because it's now going to be a generational issue. You know,
what do you mean by that when you say generational issue? What are you thinking of?
If she is angry with her father and doesn't speak to her father, and her children no longer have their grandmother or their grandfather, they're going to grow up devoid of any external relationship with their grandparents and think that that's normal.
And that's a loss.
That's true. And the other thing that I'm thinking is that they're going to learn that when something presents itself, you just cut off from the person that gives you the trouble.
Yeah, see, that's what I'm thinking. You cut off from people as a very last resort. And I'm curious that she has seems to have felt that it's already at the very last resort that she's got. Now, I would understand if he were hurting the children, if there was some protective measure that she's taking, but it sounds more punitive and unforgiving. What do you think?
It does, but she also sounds really depressed, like Dilys said.
Yeah.
So she sounds like she's struggling with some underlying depression because she's having a hard time getting up in the morning. She sleeps the day away, and you've both heard that sleeping too much can be a sign of depression.
Sure.
So maybe she can't rally the best in her to forgive or to move ahead.
Wondering about her community. You know, you share that she goes to church. She's heard the sermon her pastor has preached. But I'm wondering who's looking out for her. You know, who is paying attention to what's going on within this community to kind of say to her, Merle, hold on a minute. It has been 3 years. You know, why not go and see someone to get some help?
You know, depression, I agree. Depression is a strange thing if she's truly depressed. It's so hard to see in people. You know, they start sleeping longer, but maybe they're just overworked. You know, they maybe eat more or less, but maybe they're just hungrier or not as hungry. It's hard to give it its name, depression, and so she's probably not aware if she's depressed, and probably those looking on aren't aware either.
I agree with you. I think that when you get depressed, you start the spiral, and you go farther and farther down until you finally crash, or else someone says, you know something? Something's not right here.
So if you were a friend, if one of you were a friend of Merle's, what would you say?
Snap out of it.
Wow,
you, Dilys.
that's helpful.
You know, I'm sorry. I'm pretty confrontational with my friends. If I love you, you know.
You would say so.
I would say so.
Snap out of what? What are you talking? I'm going to play Merle here. What are you talking about?
Merle, you never leave your house. You're always home. When I come over, you're just coming out of the bed.
I love my house.
Merle, there's more to it. When was the last time you talked to your dad? See, that's the way that I am.
I'm going to stay Merle here. Would you talk to my dad if you could?
Yes, I would, because you know what I've learned? This is what I've learned. In my own experience with my father, the day before my wedding, my father shared some information with me that vexed my soul. I didn't speak to him for 4 years. 4 years.
You're telling the truth.
I'm telling you the truth. This is my own dad. For 4 years, I didn't speak to him. And then God started speaking to me. He said, now, it's interesting that you won't talk to your dad, but you want to go to church, you want to worship, you want to study your Bible. You know, what's that about, Dilys? And I had to really start doing some reflection and process that and say, well, where was my anger from? What was this about? And I realized I was hurt. I was deeply hurt that my dad had shared something with someone that I didn't think needed to know, because this was something I wanted him to know. And what God started to do for me was to say, okay, but your dad's sleeping well every night. You know, he may miss the relationship with you, but you're the one.
And you're torn
There's
up.
a knot inside of you. You're torn up. You're hurting.
Right.
Let it go. And I learned to let it go.
Now, did you do that on your own, or did someone come to you and say, snap out of it, Dilys?
You know, it was a combination of, you know, the way God moves. You know, you hear sermons, you read scripture, people talk to you, and as you share, when you start telling the story to someone else, you can kind of look at their faces and kind of tell they're going, and there's something coming behind it. So it was a combination of that.
So you're saying that this Merle needs some truth serum, a kind of a, I don't like confrontation, but someone to care enough
Someone
to say
to hold
something.
a mirror up,
Yes.
maybe,
Yeah.
gently,
Yes.
and say,
Yes.
have you noticed
Right.
that these things are happening? Maybe there's some work that you could do with a therapist about
Absolutely.
that. Now, don't you think, I don't know if you've ever had someone come to you and say, well, you probably ought to consider therapy. Someone did that to me. And I just could have bitten her head off.
Yeah.
And then I promptly became a therapist.
Yeah. Did you ever go to that?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think it really shocks people when you say, you know, you might really benefit from talking to somebody about this. It feels insulting.
There's a stigma associated with therapy.
Oh, very much.
You know,
Very
and
much.
I don't know about your communities, but in the African American, the Black community, we don't tell anybody what's going on in our lives. And one of the things I've done is when I say to someone, you might want to talk to someone about that, I usually share with them, that's something I've done myself. So I'm not asking you to do something.
Easier. Somehow that's easier to hear than, have you thought of going to therapy? Have you thought of talking to someone?
That's a nice way to say it, isn't it?
A very nice way of. I remember when I was trying to decide whether to become a therapist. I went to therapy, and the therapist said, can you help me know why you're here? And I said, I want to know if I should become a therapist. She said, There's all these things we do
Yes.
to test the water and to see if it
Yeah,
works.
and I said, I'd really like to know what it's like on the other side of the couch.
Wow.
I learned in a hurry.
Okay, so a friend goes to Merle and says, have you ever thought of talking to someone? And then she says, but we have no therapists around here. Do you know of one, or where do I even start?
You know, I think one of the things that we were taught when we were in school, in seminary, was when you go into a community, to look up all the people, go through the yellow pages, identify individuals in that community who provide those kind of services, and then talk in an ecumenical sense. Find out from your pastor, can you recommend someone to me? For some people, the first stop is their pastor. But if you go to your pastor and you're not sensing that you're growing from the experience, or he or she's not giving you or helping you to really get to the bottom of things, then ask them. You know, maybe your family life department may know people.
Well, maybe not just if they're failing. I think it's sometimes too high of an expectation, don't you think?
Yes.
That pastors should be able to do counseling.
Everything.
To be trained, everything. That's
Yes.
right. They
Right.
should know about health and therapy, and they can't know all of
they
that.
can't.
I don't think it's a bad thing to go to a therapist. I really don't. Even if there's someone in the area that's not of your faith.
Yes.
Because one of your facts was that it's unethical behavior for a therapist to try to change your belief system. Now, I do know they might challenge you a little bit, and just to find out how firmly do you hold those beliefs. Is the way that you think about your beliefs problematic? Because there are beliefs that we might have, that we might hold, that the beliefs themselves aren't bad, but maybe the way we incorporate them might be problematic.
I have 2 rules that I tell people. One is you shouldn't go to therapy if you're uncomfortable with that person. And you shouldn't go to therapy if they are leading you to a specific point. In other words, it's the client that decides the pace and where they're going. So if you abide by that rule, you won't have a therapist that leads you to a wrong place.
Carla,
if they're not leading.
I'm thankful you shared that, because I think so many people don't know what to expect from a therapy experience. You know, they walk in, and if all they've seen is what they've seen on television, you know, or what they've heard from other people, or there really is a stigma related to that, they themselves don't know what to expect when they go to that experience.
But you're not bound to it. You know, if you're with someone and you think, I just don't like, I'm not comfortable. Maybe they're male and you would rather be with female, or vice versa, or maybe they cough too much. It doesn't matter.
You're
you know,
maybe they sit behind a desk. I know someone that went to therapy, and the therapist sat behind the desk like this and just said, and what would you like to talk about? It was really off-putting, and she's just said, well, I didn't need to go back there. Felt very remote. Well, in this situation, it sounds like Merle has some possibilities. If someone would say to her, this seems really difficult for you, have you considered talking to someone about it? And a friend could say, I've heard about this person or that person that might be useful in a conversation, to have a conversation about this.
And I think also bringing her, I would suggest to her talking to her pastor as well. You know, the sermon that she heard was a starting point to go and sit with him or her and say, you know, you preached something the other day I heard, and I've been struggling with that because of what's been going on. And then from there, that may be the beginning of the journey as well. But it's including people outside of just her holding on to it.
I want to go back to that whole issue of just pray. You know, if she is depressed, depression's a very deep and complex issue. And this idea that she should just pray her way out of it is difficult. So what would you say to someone who you think is depressed, they really do need to go to therapy, but yet they think they can just pray, make it go away?
Well, I have a good answer for that. Yeah, I have a good answer for that. You could break your leg and lay at home and pray, but it's not going to heal.
Isn't that funny, Barbara? That no one would say if you broke your leg, just pray and have it go away.
We used to hear that, but so maybe if you pray and you pray to cross paths with the right individual, and you actually start seeking out someone who is trained to know how to do these things, that would probably be a good start.
And I think anyone watching us today should do some research. I think this is a resource. You know, churches need to have a list of people in a community, so if their members need therapy or help, that they can say, here are some people that we know. We can send you down that direction. We're not vouching for them, but we're saying here is some place to start.
And I want to add to that too, Dilys, that oftentimes people don't think of going to their medical doctor or their GP and just say, you know, I just am feeling like I can't get out of bed. I know I have these issues that I haven't wanted to confront, and these are the symptoms I'm having. Because a lot of doctors will know where to send people. They hear by word of mouth who might be helpful.
Now, we had talked about earlier that we were going to look at issues from a variety of standpoints, from the perspective of wholeness, cultural, physical, mental, emotional, relational, spiritual. If we were to look at Merle from the standpoint of the spiritual standpoint, what would we say or think about?
You know, I think that God enables us to do the right thing, to heal. It's if I were horribly obese, but all I did was pray, I would not lose weight, I would not feel healthy, but I would have to pray for strength, and I would also need to do something that would be useful, that would work. And the same thing with therapy, that we pray, and that God rewards us by helping us work with someone successfully to uncover some of these issues.
And I think as you're working that out, as you're processing, do it while doing something else. You know, get out of your house, start walking, get involved in something that's going to cause you to move. You move, your blood's going through your body. You know, pick up the children as opposed to driving. If you can walk, go walk. Find a girlfriend that you can actually spend some time out in nature with, hiking, swimming, just getting your body moving, because sometimes that helps to combat the feelings that you have that cause you to continue to spiral down.
She's got a huge, I mean, she's got a huge spiritual issue.
She does.
This whole issue of forgiving someone that has killed someone that you love is not small. Now, we laughed when we said, well, he didn't start out that day to commit murder, but he started out the day drinking, and that's a decision to be in some ways out of control, or certainly it's an addiction, and we can talk about that on a different program. But here's a man who made a choice that has now caused the loss of a life. And so she's in a terrible position.
My guess is people have tried to get him to stop before.
Sure.
And the fact, you know, he wouldn't stop until or unless someone was
killed. But that
killed.
makes the problem even deeper,
It does.
is how to forgive him when he hasn't changed.
Right.
And she hasn't talked to him for 3 years, but we don't know whether that's on her side or maybe he's happy.
Well, she doesn't want her children to be involved with someone who drinks that heavily. Well, spiritually too, I think we need to remember that even Jesus was very, very sad at times.
Yes.
And he still kept moving forward. He still kept praying.
Absolutely. And he took time to go out in nature and commune with God.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and also just the importance of the community, like you mentioned before, that people need to step in and help her.
Absolutely.
Well, you ready for a calling question?
Yeah.
Sure.
All right. This is from Michael, an M. Not Merle, but Michael.
Okay.
The calling question is this. My wife and I have not had a good relationship for several years. I'm assuming they're married, yeah. Yeah, my wife and I, have not had a good relationship for several years. I would like to go to therapy, but my wife does not want to come with me. I don't know what to do. Should I go by myself? Should I wait until she will go with me? And then he says again, I don't know what to do.
Michael?
Now, I've heard that a lot of times.
So have I. So have I. Interesting laugh.
It's interesting because when I have people come to me for therapy, it's usually one, and it'll be the opening comment is just exactly what you're saying. I can't get so-and-so to come, but would you fix our marriage?
Yes. Yes.
So I've seen that a lot.
Well, and I think we shouldn't be too quick to say we'll go anyway, because, you know, when one person goes to therapy, their growth begins to change.
Yes.
And it can actually make the relationship worse.
But does that mean they shouldn't grow?
Well, but I want to this point.
Okay.
I want to make this point. If they go and they change and they grow, they have to understand that there is a consequence.
Yes.
That they grow and their spouse is not growing. So I certainly know, or I think I know where you were headed. I wouldn't say that they shouldn't go, but they should think about that in order to try harder to get the spouse to go with them.
Absolutely.
In fact, I would even encourage someone to say, I will go on my own, but I hate to grow without you. I hate to change without you.
That's a nice way to put it.
That's a nice way to put it. And if as Michael is saying that his wife is the one that doesn't want to come, I can imagine what he's thinking in his mind about, well, why won't she come? And the challenge of being the husband that's going to therapy.
Well, and if she doesn't go at the beginning, it will only make it harder, because then Michael and the therapist will have a relationship, and then she's really going to feel off kilter.
But I think it is helpful. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I think it is helpful, though, for one person to go, because we know that in families, if one person starts to change, everyone else has to change to accommodate their growth. And so even to learn what part of the conflict or the difficulty is theirs that they can deal with on their own, that has some utility, even if you can't get the other to come.
What have you all found happening when you do counsel with one spouse? How often, what's the rate of when the other spouses show up? Do you find that more than often when one spouse comes, the other spouse eventually comes? Or
what do you find when people talk to you about?
You know, the couples that when I've dealt with husbands, specifically this particular husband comes to mind. When he came, his wife didn't want to come at first, and I just kept saying to him, well, let's invite her to come. She eventually came. When she came, we found out what was going on, and then they didn't come anymore because there were some things that came out and that moved on. But I found that in my experience, more than often, the other spouse doesn't. It's just that one that continues to come. And when that one changes as a result of what's going on, sometimes it gets better and sometimes it doesn't. It just reveals more what's there. You know, and it takes two to change, you know, the situation.
Or like you were saying, Barbara, one person can change and the other, the old idea of the chimes, you know, one chime can't move by itself.
That's right.
The others move in relation to it.
Right.
So it takes two to change, but sometimes that second person changes because of the first one. So it's
I think people don't like to go to therapy because they're really scared.
Oh,
and I have to, we have to remember that.
Oh,
so
absolutely.
I think that it's probably one of the most intimidating things for a couple to go together to therapy because you can tell on each other, right?
Yes. Yes.
I say to the students, I say, you know, don't think of therapy as scary.
Right.
Think of therapy as a gift to yourself.
Yes.
It's really fun. Think of it at a time when you get to say whatever you want to the one you love.
Absolutely.
That's a good way to put it. Because you have the support right there.
Absolutely.
And they
That's
help
right.
you say some of those things that never seem to come out right anyway.
And don't wait until you've got a problem in your marriage.
Yes.
Don't even wait till you get married. Go early. Learn to talk, and then, you know, avoid some.
It's kind of like doing a well baby check. You know, when you have
Yes.
a baby,
Yes.
you take the baby in at their, you know, for their immunizations.
That's right.
You
That's
make
right.
sure they're healthy, they're
But honestly,
developing
Barbara,
well.
how often do people go to therapy that don't need it?
Well, not
They
very
don't.
often.
Not very often.
But
They
I
don't.
think a lot more families would be happier and healthier if they
Yeah.
did.
Well, a well marriage check. I like that.
A well
Yeah, I like
marriage
that.
check.
I like that. And I was going to also just add again, before you get married, go. Before you even get engaged,
yes.
you know, just
Before you're
go.
engaged, yes,
Before you're
that's
engaged, just go
Absolutely.
and sit with someone, as the two of you go, because then it will become a part of your life. It'll be
And
part
if
of
they
your
ask why you're
vocabulary.
here, say, we don't know, we're just here.
Just
don't
here.
We
have
just
to
want to
have a
make sure
reason.
we're okay.
That's right.
I like
That's
that well
right.
marriage
Wow.
checkup.
Well, we've talked about a lot of things today. We've talked about depression
Yes.
as one of the reasons to go to seek therapy. We've talked about various health issues that physicians, pastors, friends can be helpful when people are interested in therapy. There's just a lot of different things. So there are many reasons why we want to be healthy, emotionally, relationally, physically, and these kinds of relational issues are really problematic. So in the end, life is tough but good, challenging but hopeful, and it's all part of this life.